Depression. It's an incredibly vast, diverse, and controversial topic. On one side, you have the biologists who are certain that this problem roots from nature. And on the other side, you have the behaviorists who associate depression with the environment. And while there are countless arguments to support both, the truth is, most psychiatrists simply accepted biology as the go-to explanation for depression. But what if the truth is completely different? What if all the antidepressant drugs, all the SSRIs and other methods of treatment currently used worldwide simply do not work? And while I do realise that this claim may sound ridiculous, I mean, how could a method of treatment used on over 13% of the US population be ineffective? Well, as you will soon find out, the truth may shock you. So join me as we go down the disturbing truth behind antidepressants. So, let's start with the basics. What are antidepressants? Antidepressants are medications used to treat psychological disorders such as major depressive disorder, anxiety disorders, and chronic pain. This refers to a wide variety of drugs, but most notably selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or simply SSRIs, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs, and serotonin modulators. The most well-known antidepressants include fluoxetine or Prozac, paroxetine and citalopram, but there are probably hundreds of them out there, so just keep in mind that this list goes way beyond these three. The theory advocating for the use of drugs to treat depression was first introduced in the 1950s and became known as the monoamine hypothesis of depression, or the chemical imbalance theory. It suggests that monoamines, which include neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine and norepinephrine, or more specifically, the lack of them, is the root cause for depression. In healthy individuals, serotonin is said to act as a mood and behavior regulator. But those who are unfortunate enough to suffer from low serotonin levels simply have a chemical imbalance. But SSRIs try to fix this by limiting the uptake of serotonin into the presynaptic cell, which essentially forces serotonin to stay active for longer, thus allowing us to feel the positive effect of the neurotransmitter much longer. What's very interesting is that the first developed antidepressants, isoniazid and iproniazid, were originally designed to treat tuberculosis. But after clinical trials began in 1951, Dr. Irving, along with his colleague Edward Robertsyk, found that, for some reason, patients treated with this drug showed a subtle general stimulation. And even more shockingly, initially antidepressants were thought to only be suitable for the worst cases of depression, with no more than 50 to 100 people per million actually qualifying to use them. But today, the world is plagued by antidepressants, with both the US, the UK and many other nations giving out tens of millions of prescriptions every year. In the US alone, antidepressants like sertraline, citalopram and fluoxetine have been prescribed over 85 million times. And now, if we ignore the negative, or what they like to call the side effects, of antidepressants such as nausea, insomnia, sexual problems, anxiety, severe headaches, high blood pressure, fast heart rate, seizures, and even increased risk of suicide, antidepressants don't seem to be that terrible, right? Considering all this astonishing evidence, the years of use in medicine, and the prominence of the monoamine hypothesis of depression in science, surely antidepressants must work. Well, as stated by Wikipedia, despite its long-standing prominence in pharmaceutical advertising, the idea that low serotonin levels cause depression is not supported by scientific evidence. And if this isn't absolutely crazy to you, then I honestly don't know what is. They are basically, they are saying that there isn't a single piece of scientific research which could support low levels of serotonin as the explanation for depression, which therefore means that SSRIs, SNRIs, and all the remaining antidepressants that aim to target the chemical imbalance in our brain are pseudoscientific and not backed by any proof. A meta-analysis of numerous antidepressant trials submitted by the Food and Drug Administration done by Irving Kirsch in 2008, which aimed to examine the efficacy of antidepressants, found that the difference between the effect of a placebo and the effect of an antidepressant is minimal for most depression sufferers. But let's slow down for a second. Who is Irving Kirsch and why did I suddenly bring him up? Kirsch is an American psychologist, lecturer in medicine at Harvard, and a leading researcher of placebo studies. After he received a PhD in psychology in 1975, he, for some reason, produced several music albums and began his work on placebo studies, publishing 10 books and more than 250 scientific articles during his career, with his most notable work being a book titled The Emperor's New Drugs. In 2008, he published a groundbreaking meta-analysis mentioned previously, and what he found had colossal effects on the discipline of psychiatry. And here's what he had to say about the effect of placebos.
The difference between the effect of a placebo and the effect of an antidepressant is minimal for most people.
So you're saying if they took a sugar pill, they'd have the same effect?
They'd have almost as large an effect, and whatever difference there would be clinically insignificant.
But people are getting better taking antidepressants. I know them.
Oh, yes.
We all know them.
The people get better when they take the drug, but it's not the chemical ingredients of the drug that are making them better. It's largely the placebo effect.
Irving Kirsch.
But let's return to Dr. Kirsch's research for a little longer. For some context, we have to know how drug trials for antidepressants are executed. This process usually begins with participants being measured on the Hamilton scale, which is a scale that runs from 0 to 51 and measures their quote-unquote level of depression. Participants are asked a series of questions by their psychiatrist, such as, do you sleep well? And based on your responses, you will be allocated an appropriate number of points. The more points you have, the more depressed you are. So, if you're rated at 26, you're thought to be more depressed than if rated at 19. After the initial assessment, participants are then allocated to one of the two groups, either the placebo or the real antidepressants. But obviously, we wouldn't know which group you're in. After a couple of weeks or months, both groups will be measured once again. And if you went down on the Hamilton scale, it means that you have improved. Next, the placebo and the real drug groups are compared, and as described by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, there must be a difference of at least 3 points between the real drug and the placebo in improvement for it to be clinically significant. Knowing this, the fact that the average difference between the placebo and the real drug found by Kirsch was only 1.8 points leads to a simple conclusion. Antidepressant drugs are not effective. And even if we took a more optimistic approach and said that this is still more effective than the placebo, just remember that this is a 1.8 point difference on a 51 point scale. A difference that's barely noticeable in terms of a person's actual experience. And the best part of this is that even the 1.8 point difference may not actually root from increased effectiveness of antidepressants. This is because when you participate in a clinical trial, you are told by the researchers that the antidepressant will produce side effects. So what happens if, after taking the pill, you start to experience side effects? Well, you'll probably figure out that you're on the real drug. And because you believe you're on the real drug, you now expect to get better. In other words, side effects of antidepressants increase the placebo effect, which accounts for the slight difference between the placebo and the antidepressants. And to be completely honest, while Kirsch's study found that antidepressants worked no better than sugar pills for the majority of patients, he did conclude that the minority of about 10 to 15%, or the extremely depressed, had some positive effect of about 4 points on the Hamilton scale. But regardless, the findings of Kirsch's meta-analysis were clear. antidepressants are not effective at dealing with depression and have little to no effect compared to placebos. And yet, following the publication of his groundbreaking conclusions, he was met with countless criticisms and hostility from numerous psychological societies. In a survey conducted on nearly 500 British doctors, asking them whether Kirsch's findings would affect how they prescribe antidepressants, only 44% actually recognised the importance of Kirsch and his results. And even more shockingly, none of the major regulatory agencies such as the FDA in the US or the MHRA in Britain haven't even recognised Kirsch's findings and continue to approve antidepressants despite their clear ineffectiveness. But this antidepressant rabbit hole goes much deeper than this. Another notable piece of evidence against antidepressants is the case of the Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder, or PMDD. And before you ask what this has got to do with antidepressants, just let me explain. You see, in 1993, a new version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, or simply the DSM, was created. This new version of the DSM, which has been used as a diagnostic tool for mental disorders for many decades now, included a brand new condition, the previously mentioned PMDD. Its main symptoms are said to occur 2 weeks before menstruation and include a feeling of exhaustion, anxiety, difficulty in concentrating, and insomnia, with up to 8% of all women believed to suffer from this condition. In 1998, the FDA approved PMDD as an official mental disorder, thus giving a green light to all the pharmaceutical companies to come up with a cure. And in just a blink of an eye, Eli Lilly, which is one of the leading pharmaceutical companies, began a mass campaign aimed at both consumers and psychiatrists, spending over $30 million on aggressive marketing and promotional materials for psychiatrists to encourage them to prescribe their patients their new, amazing drug that would help women deal with PMDD. And believe me, they did.
Think it's PMS? Think again. It could be PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. You know, those intense mood and physical symptoms the week before your period. Sound familiar? Call to get free information about PMDD and a treatment your doctor has to relieve its symptoms. Why put up with this another month?
Almost instantly, a new drug called Seraphim, which is actually a combination of a Hebrew word meaning angel and female, packaged in a pretty pink box, began to circulate. But what Eli Lilly didn't tell the thousands of women taking Seraphim is that this amazing pill that they are taking is actually Prozac. What was revealed is that, chemically, Prozac and Seraphim are identical. The only difference between them is that their names and packaging were different. So without their permission and knowledge, tens of thousands of women were prescribed antidepressants under the facade of a drug for PMDD. Another similar example of rebranding antidepressants as entirely different medications was Zyban, which was approved by the FDA in 1997 as a smoking cessation pill, despite being chemically identical to Wellbutrin, a well-known antidepressant. And guess what? In both these cases, those administered the antidepressants have noticed improvements. Even though none of the individuals prescribed Prozac or Wellbutrin had depression and didn't need any form of treatment, giving them antidepressants seemingly improved their condition. How is that even possible, right? To answer this question, we must look at a certain phenomenon called contextual meanings. You see, while the drug itself was not helping women with PMDD, there is something else that plays a gigantic role here. The packaging of the drug. Have you noticed that drugs often tend to have specific colours? And while this may seem completely irrelevant, there's a reason why Viagra is blue. There's also a reason why stimulants such as Concerta and Ritalin are yellow, while tranquilizers like Xanax and Valium are blue. And most notably, there is a reason why Seraphim, the drug used for PMDD, is pink. As humans, we tend to associate specific colours and shapes with certain attributes. And as you most likely know, pink is associated with females. But still, could the very colour of a pill help it work? Well, it turns out it does. As investigated in a study published in The Lancet, the colour of a pill can drastically affect the results. In this study, 56 medical students were each given 2 pills, a blue pill and a red pill, and told that one of them is a tranquilizer while the other is a stimulant. After taking the pills, the students were asked which is which, and surprisingly, the majority concluded that the blue pills were tranquilizers and the red pills the stimulants. When asked how they have reached that conclusion, the students said that the blue pill made them feel less alert and sleepy, while the red pills made them more concentrated and energetic. What they didn't know is that chemically, both the blue pills and the red pills were identical. They were both made out of sugar. This is absolutely mind-blowing. A plain sugar pill with no added substances, chemicals or nothing, just a specific colour, was enough to convince medical students that they've taken a strong stimulant or tranquilizer. So how does that apply to Seraphim? Well, just remember that Seraphim is pink. In addition to that, it was marketed specifically towards women and recommended by psychiatrists and doctors as a cure for their PMDD. So not only do we have a specific colour associated with women, but also other contextual factors such as the setting and an authority figure. And to understand this, just imagine yourself in this scenario. You're attending an office meeting listening to a presentation, but suddenly you're hit with a strong headache. The man sitting next to you notices that you're in pain and offers you a small white pill. He gives it to you and promises that the pill will help you feel better. You, after some consideration, decide to take the pill because the man is your coworker, so you can trust him. And after a while you notice that disappointingly nothing happens and you still have that annoying headache. So you turn to the man and ask what he gave you. He replies that it was just a sugar pill. So why didn't it work? Well, the obvious answer would be because it was made out of sugar. Of course, sugar isn't going to help you with a headache. But as we already know from other placebo studies, the probable reason why the pill didn't work is due to contextual meanings. I mean, why would some random pill given to you in an office by your coworker work? But now, imagine that you meet another guy, this time at a hospital, and you believe that he is a doctor. Something incredible would happen if he gave you the same exact pill. Its effectiveness could increase by up to 40%. This was investigated in several studies, but most notably in a study done by Meyer et al. In 2002 titled Meaning, Medicine and the Placebo Effect. The effectiveness of this imaginary pill was discovered to increase even further from 44 to 62% when the doctor treated participants with warmth and affection, as found by Kapchuk et al. In 2008. Considering the massive impact contextual factors such as the setting have on the effect of placebos, it's no surprise that the women given PMDD reported to have improved after taking Seraphim. They essentially became convinced that Seraphim was an antidote for their problem, and thanks to factors such as the color of the pill, the aggressive marketing and recommendations from doctors, they expected it to help them. And even though the drug itself is just Prozac, which is used to treat an entirely different problem, and was simply rebranded as Seraphim, it helped them because they believed that it would help them. Which actually leads us to yet another study on placebos. In 2002, a fascinating experiment was published by Meyer et al. Titled Treatment Expectancies, Patient Alliance and Outcome in the US National Library of Medicine, which set out to evaluate the effectiveness of antidepressants and psychotherapy treatment of depression. Before treatment began, every participant was asked the following question: what is likely to happen as a result of your treatments? When the researchers calculated the results, a shocking conclusion was made. The answer the patients gave to this question predicted their outcome after treatment. Among 151 patients who participated, most of them who expected their treatment to be effective have been observed to achieve greater symptom reduction, while those with a negative attitude ended up with less or no symptom reduction at all. Furthermore, this result was the same regardless of whether the patient had been treated with a real antidepressant, psychotherapy, or a placebo. So the conclusion is simple: expectations matter. And as we have already seen in previous cases, these positive expectations can be massively increased by contextual factors. Another thing that I'd like to discuss today is the alleged censorship of certain drug trials by pharmaceutical corporations. You see, for a long time, most patients, and more importantly psychiatrists, were convinced that all drugs approved by the FDA or the MDHA were sufficiently tested and safe to use. I mean, why wouldn't they, right? Antidepressants are in fact supported by tens, if not hundreds of different studies and drug trials showcasing their effectiveness, with drugs like fluoxetine or Prozac having 87 different clinical trials. But of course, this belief had begun to lose its supporters with time as more and more conflicting evidence was published, with one of the most notable studies being a meta-analysis carried out by Turner et al. In 2008 titled Selective Publication of Antidepressant Trials and Its Influence on Apparent Efficacy. And for some context, just remember that the FDA currently classifies 91% of drug trials as positive. In their study, the researchers aimed to investigate the suppression of negative data for psychiatric drugs by pharmaceutical companies. It reviewed 74 major studies of antidepressants efficacy approved by the FDA, and what was found is absolutely mind-blowing. Among the 74 FDA-registered studies, a total of 38 studies showed positive results for antidepressants. The remaining 36 studies showed negative results. And now just take a guess. How many positive and how many negative studies have been published? Well, out of the 38 positive studies, 37 were published, while of the 36 negative studies, only 3 have been published, with the remaining 33 being either completely removed or manipulated to convey a positive outcome. Remember the statistic that I gave you earlier about how many drug trials were interpreted as positive by the FDA? Yeah, after this meta-analysis, it was concluded that only 51% of drug trials are actually positive, which is a decrease from 91 to 51%. Ridiculous. But let's finally return to our original topic. We already know that antidepressants are not as effective as they are said to be. We also know about the importance of placebo effect and self-fulfilling prophecy, censorship of negative drug trials, and how the effectiveness of drugs is determined by circumstances and contextual factors. But how does that all actually relate? Well, as I said at the start of this video, antidepressants do not work, or at least not in the way that we believe they do. And while they do definitely help people, I mean, of course they do. I personally know people who use SSRIs and have noticed improvements. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's not about the serotonin levels. It's also not about the norepinephrine, dopamine, tryptophan depletion, or any gene-related explanations. And to bring some science into this bold claim, you can check out the meta-analysis of studies into depression by Joanna Mankrieff, titled The Serotonin Theory of Depression, a systematic umbrella review of the evidence, which actually concluded that there is either no evidence or no reliable and credible evidence for any of the explanations I have just named. And listen, while I do recognize the importance of psychiatry, I do believe that it's simply full of lies and straight-out manipulations. And the topic of antidepressants is a great example. But there are many more that I haven't had the chance to mention yet, such as the incredibly flawed and unscientific process of diagnosis, with both the DSM and the ICD having an unimaginable amount of mistakes. So, in conclusion, the industry of antidepressants is flawed in many ways, and millions of people worldwide are being poisoned with extremely harmful and even fatal drugs instead of receiving beneficial help. But I also do realize that, unfortunately, we don't live in a utopia, so obviously this isn't going to change because, it brings money and doesn't have a good alternative. I just really hope that the psychiatric community will finally start recognizing the danger of the chemical imbalance hypothesis and move away from this flawed form of treatment. And with that, we have reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for spending your time to watch my video. Honestly, it means the world to me. Let me know if you have any thoughts about this topic, and make sure to subscribe and leave a like to help me reach more people and grow my channel. Speaking of which, I have a few really exciting videos coming up on the topic of psychology and science in general, so please let me know if you'd like to see them. And comment down any ideas and topics that you would like me to cover. Okay? That's it for today. Thank you once again for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye.